They kept her scrubbing their marble floors while her father was lowered into the earth. No whispered prayer, no final goodbye, only the relentless hiss of a mop across polished stone, as the world outside wept for the man who had raised her. The chandeliers overhead dripped golden light, mocking her grief with their glittering indifference, while the Whitmore family floated through their afternoon tea, oblivious or perhaps purposefully blind to the wound they had carved into her soul. The air itself seemed heavier in that moment, pressing down on Isabella Cruz's chest, filling her lungs with silence that screamed louder than any sob could. Every movement she made, every silent step across the grand hall, was a thread unraveling, slow, unseen, inevitable. They believed they had buried a poor man in a forgotten grave. What they didn't realize was that in doing so, they had started the slow burial of their own legacy. Where are you watching from? Stay with us for a story where silent dignity turns into unstoppable justice. Isabella Cruz had long ago learned how to fold herself into the background of places that were never meant to feel like home. At 28, she moved through the grand Whitmore estate with the silent grace of someone who understood that survival depended on being invisible. Her black and white uniform, crisp and clean, was less clothing and more armor, a shield against the cruel glances and cold commands that flowed so easily from those she served. Behind her composed expression lay a well of quiet resilience, the kind formed not from choice but necessity. Every polished floor and dusted chandelier bore the imprint of her hands, though no one ever noticed unless she faltered. The mansion itself stood like a monument to excess. Marble pillars rose like indifferent gods toward ceilings draped in crystal light. Velvet drapes swept the windows in grand arcs, and each hall echoed with a self-importance that smothered humility. Yet beneath the gleaming surfaces the house creaked with something rotten, an arrogance so deeply rooted that it mistook cruelty for custom. Charles Whitmore, the patriarch, ruled the estate with the cold efficiency of a man who measured loyalty by silence and worth by pedigree. His silver hair and tailored suits projected dignity, but his eyes, sharp and dismissive, revealed the rot beneath. Beside him, his daughter Daphne embodied the same brittle elegance, wrapped in golden silk and disdain. Her beauty was a weapon sharpened by privilege, her words often coated in honey, but carrying the sting of a lash. Watching from the wings were the Whitmore children, too young yet to fully understand the ugliness they were being groomed to inherit. Within these opulent walls, Isabella battled daily with the invisible weight of her place in the world. Grief gnawed at the edges of her composure, a quiet ache she pushed deeper each time she was summoned with a snap of fingers or a hissed reprimand. She had promised her father, in one of his fading lucid moments, that she would not lose herself to bitterness, that she would rise by holding tight to her dignity, no matter how heavy it became. Today, however, the marble under her feet seemed colder, the chandeliers seemed dimmer, and somewhere deep in the bones of the mansion, a reckoning began to stir, silent and sure as the tide. The call came just after dawn, the brittle ring of the staff phone slicing through the cold stillness of the servants' quarters. Isabella answered with hands that already knew what her heart could not bear to hear. Her father was gone, slipped away in the thin hours before sunrise, alone, his final breath spent waiting for a daughter trapped in someone else's castle. She stood for a moment in the dim hallway, the old grief settling over her shoulders like a cloak she could never quite shrug off. No tears, no wailing, only the silent tightening of her throat and the quiet click of the receiver falling back into place. She found Mr. Whitmore in the breakfast room, the morning sun gilding his silver hair as he skimmed the headlines, a steaming cup of imported coffee at his elbow. Daphne lounged nearby, lazily scrolling through her phone, her silk dress glinting in the light. Isabella approached with the careful neutrality of someone offering bad news to a king. She bowed her head slightly, voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, my father passed away this morning. I respectfully ask permission to attend the funeral." Mr. Whitmore didn't even look up from his paper. "Today? Absolutely not. We have guests arriving. The house must be in perfect order." There was no apology, no hesitation, just a flat, iron-edged decision wrapped in politeness, thin enough to see the cruelty underneath. Daphne smirked over her phone, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm sure your father would understand. Besides, it's not as if he'd know whether you're there or not." The words landed like a slap, but Isabella did not flinch. Her fingers, clenched tightly behind her back, trembled once, then steadied. Around her, the gilded room pulsed with silence, the chandeliers casting their indifferent glow over a scene that should have shattered the marble floors. Other staff members passing by paused briefly, sensing the sharp crack of injustice in the air, but quickly moved on, their own chains too tightly wound to risk speaking. The morning unfolded like a slow, cruel performance. Isabella served breakfast with mechanical precision, poured tea with hands that had spent the night holding hope, too fragile to survive the dawn. Every click of a coffee cup meeting a saucer, every polite murmur from the guests, layered over her grief until it became a living thing, heavy and suffocating. She moved like a ghost through the halls, unseen by the very people who had chained her there. Somewhere, not far from this palace of glittering cruelty, her father was being laid to rest in a simple wooden coffin, without his daughter to hold his memory close. The injustice clung to the walls like smoke, unseen but suffocating. And somewhere deep inside Isabella, something shifted. A silent promise that this cruelty would not go unanswered. By the time the afternoon guests arrived, the mansion gleamed like a jewel, every surface polished, every chandelier dripping with light, every hallway echoing with the careful orchestration of wealth parading itself. Isabella moved among the guests like a shadow stitched into the gold-threaded wallpaper, her heart a hollow ache she dared not show. On silver trays balanced in her steady hands, glasses of champagne trembled with every footstep, the delicate bubbles mocking the quiet storm brewing inside her. Every polite smile she offered, every whispered "sir" and "ma'am," felt like a betrayal, not to the Whitmores, but to herself. Mr. Whitmore held court near the grand staircase, basking in the admiration of his peers, while Daphne floated from group to group, her laughter high and brittle, the perfect imitation of grace. Yet beneath the polished exterior, cracks had begun to form. Isabella caught snatches of conversation as she moved, whispered concerns about the family's finances, rumors of unpaid debts hidden behind glittering charity galas. She filed each fragment away, stitching them together in the quiet corners of her mind. As she reached for a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her hand trembled, just once, and a crystal glass slipped from her grasp, shattering against the marble with a sound sharp enough to slice through the chatter. Conversations froze. Heads turned. Mr. Whitmore's face darkened, a storm gathering behind his cold, measured gaze. Across the room, Daphne's lips curled into a thin, victorious smile, pleased to have a new reason to humiliate. Clumsy as ever, Daphne hissed under her breath as she swept past, her golden dress trailing behind her like a comet of disdain. The tension in the room tightened like a drawn bow, but Isabella said nothing. She stooped, collected the shards carefully, the sting of a cut on her finger, the only proof that she was still flesh and blood beneath the uniform. In that silence, as she knelt before the gathering of the wealthy and indifferent, something inside her hardened. They believed they had reduced her to glass, fragile, disposable. But Isabella was not glass. She was the hand that could bring the house down, brick by gilded brick. As she rose, she caught a glimpse of a cousin of the Whitmores, James Whitmore, sharp-eyed, slighted earlier by some insult at dinner, watching her with something dangerous glinting in his gaze. And in that fleeting exchange without a word, Isabella realized that storms did not always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they were born in the quiet pooling of anger, in the stillness before walls came crashing down. The party resumed, brittle and forced, but the ground had already shifted beneath their feet. The secret the Whitmores had buried beneath their chandeliers and marble would not stay hidden much longer. Isabella returned to her duties, her movements calm, her face serene. But deep within, the first tremors of justice had begun. The mansion's grandeur, once so imposing, now felt brittle, a hollow shell waiting for the right word to collapse it. 2 mornings after the ill-fated party, the first blow struck. Newspapers, like vultures drawn to the scent of decay, arrived on the marble steps of the Whitmore estate. Headlines screaming accusations in bold black ink. Whitmore, family under investigation for charity fraud. Below the mastheads were photographs of Charles Whitmore, smiling thinly beside golden banners of causes he had quietly siphoned into private accounts. Whispers turned to roars as television vans cluttered the manicured driveways, their antennae stabbing the sky like judgment. Inside the house, panic bloomed. Servants scurried and whispered. Some disappeared entirely, their loyalty evaporating like mist under the sudden heat of scandal. Daphne stormed from room to room, barking orders no one listened to, her once glittering presence cracking into something desperate and shrill. Mr. Whitmore retreated into his study, curtains drawn against the camera flashes that sparked like distant gunfire beyond the iron gates. And through it all, Isabella moved like a phantom, unseen, untouched, her heart steady in a way it hadn't been in years. She had not exposed them. She had not needed to. Their own rotted foundations had betrayed them, built on greed and sustained by cruelty. The cousin, James, had slipped the documents to the press out of spite, but fate had turned his pettiness into justice. The symbolism could not be ignored. The same chandeliers that once illuminated grand galas now cast harsh, unforgiving light over frantic, fearful faces. The marble floors, polished so religiously, now reflected nothing but a crumbling dynasty gasping for air. In the rare, tense meetings between the remaining staff, Isabella said little. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that no amount of stolen money could purchase or destroy. Every clipped shout from Daphne, every barked order from Mr. Whitmore, rolled off her like rain off iron. She had already won, not by fighting them, not by screaming, but by enduring long enough to see the truth rise and devour them whole. As news crews camped outside and distant relatives scrambled to distance themselves from the Whitmore name, Isabella stood at the edge of the grand staircase one last time, no longer invisible, no longer bowed, watching quietly as the empire that once enslaved her crumbled under the weight of its own sins. The downfall came quicker than anyone could have imagined. Investigations revealed layer after layer of deceit. embezzled charity funds, falsified tax documents, bribes hidden beneath glittering donations. Mr. Whitmore was escorted from his mansion in handcuffs, the same polished marble that once reflected his triumphs, now reflecting his disgrace. Daphne's carefully curated image shattered overnight. Friends vanished, partnerships dissolved, and invitations that once flooded in like rivers dried up to nothing but dust. The mansion, that towering symbol of their supposed greatness, was quietly listed for sale under a broker's breathless urgency, its grandeur now a decaying relic too heavy for a ruined name to bear. Isabella did not watch their final fall with glee. She had no need for vengeance. She had been forged in deeper fires than their scorn could ever kindle. With her last paycheck tucked into her pocket, uncashed, unwanted, she slipped away from the estate as quietly as she had once entered it. No announcement, no lingering farewell. Just the soft closing of a grand iron gate behind her, as if the very earth sighed in relief to see her free. A few weeks later, dressed simply in a soft blue dress her father once loved, Isabella stood by a humble gravestone in a sun-dappled cemetery far from the marble cages of her past. There were no chandeliers here, no velvet carpets, no heavy doors barring her grief. Only open sky, wildflowers trembling in the breeze, and the warm, silent company of the man who had taught her that dignity was not something wealth could buy. It was something born quietly, lived daily, and carried bravely. She knelt, placing a small bouquet of fresh daisies at the foot of the grave, her fingers lingering against the worn stone, as if she could still feel the strength of his calloused hands wrapped around her own. "I'm here, Papa," she whispered, her voice breaking free into the open air, needing no permission to mourn, to love, to heal, in time, with the help of a distant relative who admired her unshakable grace. Isabella opened a modest bakery in a sunlit corner of town, a place filled not with marble and chandeliers but with the rich smell of fresh bread, the laughter of children, the comforting chatter of neighbors. It was a small life, some might say, but it was honest. It was hers. And in every loaf, every smile offered across a counter worn smooth by kindness, Isabella built something no scandal could touch, an empire of dignity, one quiet, beautiful moment at a time. She no longer lived under anyone's shadow. She no longer served beneath false crowns. She had found her own place, carved with gentle hands and stitched together with a kind of strength the Whitmores had never even learned to recognize. They built their empire on pride, and watched it collapse under the silent footsteps of the girl they thought invisible. Isabella Cruz did not raise her voice, did not seek revenge in flames or fury. She simply lived her truth with a strength so quiet, so steady, that it outlasted marble pillars and golden chandeliers alike. In the end, it was not the loudest who endured, but the one who carried dignity through every humiliation, every closed door, every stolen goodbye. Hers was not a victory that needed to be shouted from rooftops. It was sewn quietly into the fabric of her life, where no scandal, no power, no cruelty could ever tear it loose again. Have you ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you were less, only to rise quietly, powerfully, in your own time? We would love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Your strength could inspire someone who needs it most today. If you believe that true power comes not from noise, but from unshakable dignity, stay with us. More stories of silent storms and unexpected victories await. Thank you for being here. And until next time, remember, even the softest footsteps can shake the mightiest walls.